This is the second of a collection of videos on the various aspects of Australian culture presented through my own personal experiences. This video is on diet and covers the foods of my childhood for the period from birth to the end of 1970. When I was born in 1956, maternity and infant care in Bellingen was strictly governed by highly structured, rigid and scientific routines. I was my mum's first child. Her introduction to that routine came from hospital medical staff during the 9 to 14-day hospital confinement before being discharged home. During the hospital stay, babies were typically kept in a staff access only communal hospital nursery and brought to their mothers on ward strictly on the 4-hour feeding schedule. Once discharged, new mothers received guidance from the local baby health centre sisters through the dedicated mother and baby health clinic that had been operating out of the local CWA rooms since 1940. That maternity advice focused heavily on the strict by-the-clock 4-hourly feeding schedule, which dictated feeding precisely every 4 hours, usually 6 a.m, 10 a.m, 2 p.m, 6 p.m and 10 p.m. Healthcare providers encouraged mothers not to feed on demand or comfort a crying baby between scheduled feeds and to eliminate nighttime feeds as early as possible. My mother could not breastfeed me, so all my 4-hourly feeds would have relied on the other early feeding methods for that time, such as commercial powder from brands like Nestlé's Lactogen, diluting canned evaporated milk with boiled water and adding a sweetener, or utilising fresh cow's milk from either their own or local dairy farms, which had to be strictly boiled to kill bacteria. All these early options lacked the modern fortification of essential vitamins or fatty acids. Because of this, infant feeding guidelines in the mid to late 1950s relied heavily on supplementing a baby's diet and the early introduction of solid foods. Mothers were told to give babies small spoonfuls of freshly squeezed orange juice or tomato juice at just a few weeks old to prevent scurvy, as well as cod liver oil for vitamins A and D, and to introduce fortified iron cereals like Farex or pureed bone broth at 4 to 6 weeks old to prevent anemia. By the time I was on regular solid foods, the Heinz commercially prepared canned baby foods in Australia were sold primarily in small blue and white metal tins in their strained versions, and there were also junior tinned meal versions for older babies and toddlers. Unlike today, the late 1950s Heinz 57 varieties lineup included savoury meals alongside fruit and egg custards. Some of the more memorable, not necessarily in a good way, were strained brains and tripe and vegetables. By the time I was 3, we had moved from Bellingen, my mother's intergenerational family home, to a new home with her parents much closer to Bellingen on Scotchman Road. The move was likely prompted by my mother's medical issues during the birth of her 3rd child. Looking back, it's hard to imagine how isolated and vulnerable she must have felt with 3 children under 3 years of age. In Bellingen, she could walk to town via a downhill dirt track and from there to the hospital if needed. When we moved into town, most of the farm livestock came with us, as did 2 of Pop Kelly's prized navel orange trees. I was under 5 years old at the time, but I remember that even though they were not huge trees, they were mature and well advanced and required 2 men each bush to carry them into the orchard. I remember Pop, even though he was ill and bedridden, making his son and sons-in-law carry his straight-backed, armed cane chair, with him sitting in it, outside to where the plants were to go, so he could supervise the process. At the time I was born and during my childhood years, my family raised, killed, dressed and ate our own poultry that was not kept for egg production for our own use. Over those years, most of our ducks were Australian black Australops and our ducks were Muscovies. During my childhood years, we also regularly caught a range of freshwater fish. My personal favourite was the local catfish, which is apparently now known as the Bellingen River eeltail catfish. My son Bart has generously provided some catch and release photos of the two separate species that were often just called collectively perch when I was young. The Australian bass is in the top two images on the right, and the lower image is of a perch. In the 1960s, the most common perch in the New South Wales and Queensland eastern flowing coastal rivers, including our local Bellinger and Kaleng rivers, was the native freshwater jungle perch. Due to coastal development that blocks their access to the sea for reproduction, their distribution has been greatly reduced and they now are only known to be abundant in tropical North Queensland. Apart from the navel oranges already mentioned, the Scotchman's designated orchard section on the reservoir side of the house and the house yards generally grew an abundance of produce. This included bush lemons, black and green grapevines, a large loquat tree, a large persimmons tree. There were also, as I always called them, Monsterio delicio plants, along with passion fruit vines and white and yellow peach trees. Less successful on the property were apricot, plum, pawpaw and mandarin trees. My personal most memorable tree, and also the largest, was the mulberry that grew over the chook pen. It was large enough all four of us girls and many of our cousins could all perch along its branches at the same time and eat our fill. There were always extensive vegetable gardens on the hillside. These images, borrowed mainly from the Yates online seed shopping website, reflect the crops and varieties I remember. When packet seed was purchased for the garden, the seeds from the resulting crop were encouraged, collected, dried out on newspaper and carefully packed in sealed envelopes in our seed tin. Each envelope had the date and name of the crop written on it. Seeds from the tin were planted the next season and sometimes swapped with family and friends. Plant crops grown from crowns and rhizomes and tubers, etc., were also swapped around. We were considered picky or finicky eaters if we didn't eat everything on offer. My pet hate was sweet potato. Whenever I could, I would hide it on the ledge underneath the kitchen table where we sat to eat, with the intention of disposing of the evidence later. I still remember being caught and confronted with the mouldy mess. In those childhood years in Bellingen, not all the fruit we had access to was grown by us and our neighbouring families. Some of it just grew wild. What we called wild raspberries, my favourite, were a local native that looked more like strawberries growing on a small light green rose bush. our wild gooseberries in the yard with the introduced Cape gooseberry. Introduced blackberry vines grew wild in the untended road edge areas, and when in season were much enjoyed, as it was long before our road was upgraded enough to be maintained by the council and long before roadside spraying. Even though we had sufficient food made available, we still liked to investigate our own alternative options. We found that chewing a mouthful of the chook's wheat for a very long time turned it into a kind of gum, almost like the chewing gum others spoke of. The stems of a local weed we called oxalis or sour grass provided a juicy, zesty tang. Nan's garden grew a vine we called a cigarette or cigar flower at the front of the house, and a bush we called hanging Chinese lantern near the fence. Both were picked for their nectar and the evidence carefully hidden. Because of the heavy rainfall in the area, leaching the soil of minerals, farmers used to put out salt licks for the cattle. These were pressed mineral blocks, and the crystals were delicious. I wasn't a fan of the dog biscuits, similar to the image on the left, but I knew others were. The years at the dairy farm at Sunny Corner. This was when there was an abundance of milk and cream, and we would make our own butter. In 1960, the Central Dairy Society combined the operations of the Raleigh plant with the Upper Bellingen Dairy Cooperative at Bellingen, and Raleigh became the main hub, centralising all dairy processing for the entire valley, and the production in Bellingen stopped. On this farm, mushrooms were abundant after rain, and they were enjoyed cooked in butter on toast for breakfast. The farm had a huge plum tree, and we loved the freedom to eat as many as we could pick, as control of the stone fruit trees on the Scotchman by Nana was a strict no child access policy. Our time at the farm was usually limited to the odd weekend or holiday, apart from the morning and evening milking, but they were some happy times. It was also the first time I was involved in harvesting a feed of the local Kaleng River freshwater mussels. The image on the right is from an online Guernsey dairying site, but I wanted to share it here because it brought back so many memories of our own cattle coming in to be milked on Mrs. Vallis's farm that we leased at Sunny Corner. The tracks they wore in the rich pasture paddocks from so many trips in and out were narrow and deep. Oh, and ours didn't wear bells. You had to stay alert to know where they were, because they would walk or run straight over you if you were on their path. A typical day at home. My regular childhood meals at home consisted of a breakfast of toast made at an open door of the kitchen slow combustion stove with a toasting fork, egg usually boiled, cereal or cooked porridge in winter, and boxed cornflakes, wheat bix, or rice bubbles, for example, in the warmer months, juice and milk drinks. Morning tea at home was usually home-baked goods or fruit. Lunch at home was a sandwich or leftovers on toast. Afternoon tea was very much a repeat of morning tea and included home-baked goods and fruit. Tea was our main meal of the day and was predominantly meat and vegetables, and dessert was always served after tea and included a wide range of home-baked goods with custard, cream or ice cream in summer. So what did a typical day's food at primary school entail? We had small bottles of flavoured milk delivered for morning tea each day when I was in primary school. If we wanted anything else to drink, it was usually water straight from the school tap. We took our lunches packed from home. Tuck shop was a very rare occasion, if it happened at all. The image on the right of a Vegemite sandwich being prepared does not reflect my ratio of Vegemite or Marmite to butter and bread for my sandwich preference. The butter and bread would need to be thicker and the spread just a smear. Sunday and celebration days usually included a baked dinner in the middle of the day for lunch. If the roasted meat was poultry, it included us killing, plucking and dressing the bird. I was not able to actually chop a chicken's head off. If that was my job, then I would trade it with my sister Robin for her indoor chores. Christmas pudding making always included each of the household placing a threepence, sixpence or silver charm into the mix for luck before it was bagged and cooked. There were certain foods that became associated with certain celebrations. Dad's birthday was always celebrated with his favourite coffee cake for afternoon tea. And my parents' anniversary dinner was Mum's favourite meal of pork chops. After we'd killed and dressed our poultry, our chooks, Dad would make his famous giblet stew with the gizzard, heart and liver mixed with mainly potatoes, rice and curry. Every year, the day before Easter, we would take one of the breakfast bowls outside and create an Easter nest from grass and flowers to leave by our beds for the Easter bunny to fill, which always produced a variety of chocolate for Easter. Among my memories of special occasion foods that stood out because they were not common locally and came from places far away that I'd never been, one of them was our annual candy sugar egg from Auntie Flo, similar to the image on the right. I also remember our annual Christmas Advent calendars with their hidden treats behind every door. These also came from Auntie Flo. One year, Auntie Shirley and Uncle Doug arrived after dark for Christmas from their home in the fishing town of Laurelton with their contribution to Christmas dinner. I can still see the bag of lobsters being tipped out on the front lawn and watching them moving around. Our family also enjoyed the occasional fishing trip to the coast at either Hungry Head, Urunga or North Beach. These trips always included a picnic and were usually with extended family. One of these trips was where I was introduced to oysters fresh off the rocks by my father. He suggested that I should probably not chew it, just swallow it straight down. I didn't feel the need to try a second one. These trips were also an opportunity for saltwater fishing. Sometimes while the men rock fished nearby, we would beach fish. Nana kept a well-stocked pantry. Example of what could typically be found in it are listed on the screen below. But not found in the pantry, and often used, was meat that was either our own livestock or minced sausages, pork, hogget or mutton and sliced Devon from the local butcher in the middle of town. Bread was usually square, white, sliced, sometimes a high top or a tank loaf, which was Nan's favourite, from the local baker at the top of town. Potatoes and the occasional fruit and vegetables were bought from the shop or came straight from the Dorrigo growers. My Nan's relatives, Bert and Tess Hopkins, had the local fruit and vegetable shop in the middle of Bellingen. Nana and Mum regularly made jam drops, cornflake biscuits, sponge cakes, lemon orange or jam tarts, fruit cakes, pikelets, pancakes, patty cakes, and either sweet or savoury scones or dumplings. Nana would use a small glass, usually a washed out spread container, to cut her sweet scones into smooth flat rounds and would form her savoury ones into rougher textured domed oval shapes. The savoury ones were my favourite, with butter and cheese. Her savoury dumplings were added to a large pot of stew on the stove, and her sweet ones were served with milk and sugar or syrup. In the 1960s, a dripping tin, which was just a simple metal or ceramic container, often with an internal strainer, used to store leftover animal fat from roast meat like beef and pork, which it was an everyday kitchen staple, and it was used for other cooking methods. I always remember pickles, chutneys, jams, and to a less extent marmalades being made at her home. Lemon curd and passion fruit butter was also made, though their shelf lives were much shorter. The choco vines produced ample produce for Mum's pickles and Nana's melon jam. I remember the excitement when the Fowler's Ficola stovetop bottled fruit preserver arrived. The stovepot part was large. Mum's arms barely would reach around it. This was our chance to preserve some of our stone fruit crop each year and to utilise the China pears from the tree down the road. It was all hands on deck when the time came to prepare the fruit for bottling. The glass jars, like the ones shown on the right, were sealed with a red rubber ring between the glass and the lid, and they were secured with a metal brace across the top for processing in the stove top cooker pot. Growing up as I did, I had limited exposure to modern home groceries. In my early high school years, one of my first cooking homework assignments was to plan a 2-course meal and bring in the ingredients from home required. I looked in the household pantry for food to fit the assignment brief and found a tin of tuna, a block of Kraft processed cheese, macaroni and rice. I was set. My planned meal was similar to what you can see on the right. And yes, the lesson was about convenience food. But my meal really was a good example of a bland convalescent or child's meal that decades later many of my particular family members would show a preference for. But back to the lesson. What a shock it was that day to be exposed to a whole new world of food, including but not limited to cardboard boxed Vesta meals. 1970 was a big year. Our matriarch, Mater, my nan's mother, who had lived with us for a while, died while on holiday in Brisbane. I remember meeting my nana's brother, Uncle Jack Cordwell, on the path to the front gate to be told that Mater was not coming back home to live, just to be buried. As a 14-year-old growing into a young woman, it was an abrupt way to leave my childhood behind. The image on the right is of Mater's farewell favourite sweet treat. She would share it with us from her magic lolly tin that never seemed to get less. 1970 also marked a change to the Dairy Act that forced local dairy farmers to supply fresh milk instead of cream to the butter factories. This and the progressive acquisition of farming lands by the APM decimated the local dairy industry and gave rise to a new wave of alternate settlers who brought different food options. Thank you.